Before starting this episode, make sure you have seen the previous ones so you don't get lost in the story. I guarantee you won't regret it. Let's go. The image of Miguel, pale and lifeless, repeats itself in Beatriz's mind like a broken record. Every breath is a reminder of loss, every heartbeat an echo of the promise, revenge. The mansion, once a home, is now a cold prison, a sanctuary for the fury that consumes it. She moves like a shadow through the corridors, the pain turning to steel. The books of obscure rituals once avoided are now his constant companions. She devours every word, every symbol, looking for a way to obliterate the entity, to punish those who stole her happiness. Ricardo tries to get closer, but finds only a wall of ice. "Beatriz, you need to stop," he begs, his voice charged with concern. "You are destroying yourself. Miguel wouldn't want you to do that." Miguel's name is like a scam. The tears threaten to fall, but Beatriz repels them violently. "Michael is dead," she hisses, her voice charged with hatred, "and I'm going to make them pay for it. I will pluck every one of them out of hell and make them beg for mercy." She pulls away from Ricardo, her determination stamped on her face. She needs to be alone. She needs to strengthen herself for the coming battle. At night, he finds her at the makeshift training camp in the garden. Every blow, every move is executed with lethal precision, anger fueling its strength. She becomes a weapon, a machine of destruction, ready to annihilate anyone who stands in her way. But in the silence of the night, doubts assail her. She sees herself in the mirror, and what she sees terrifies her. Her eyes, once filled with love and compassion, now reflect an icy coldness, an emptiness that frightens her. She has terrible nightmares, in which Miguel watches her sadly, accusing her of becoming the monster he hated so much. She wakes up screaming in a cold sweat, fear paralyzing her. Miguel's memories are a torment. She remembers their smiles, their hugs, their promises of a future together. But these memories also remind her of the pain of loss, of the injustice of her death. The entity whispers in her mind, trying to seduce her with promises of power and revenge. She resists with all her strength, but the temptation is great. The mansion, sensing the change in Beatriz, becomes more hostile. Doors slam by themselves, shadows move, whispers fill the air. She feels observed, persecuted, tested. One day while training, she has a vision. She sees herself in the future, transformed into a monstrous creature, thirsty for blood and power. She terrorizes people, destroys everything in her path. The sight shakes her deeply. She realizes that she's in danger of getting lost in the darkness, of becoming the monster she swears to destroy. She needs to make a choice. She can indulge in revenge and become an evil creature, or she can honor Miguel's memory and fight for a better world. The decision is difficult, the pain is unbearable, but she knows that Miguel would be watching her, encouraging her to do the right thing. With a sigh, she gets up and heads towards the library. She needs to find a way to control her anger, to use her pain for good. She needs to reconnect with her humanity before it's too late. How far would you go to avenge the death of someone you love? Would you be able to resist the temptation of power and revenge? See if you are already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Leave your like so we know that you are enjoying the content, and leave your opinion below in the comments of what content or story you would like to appear here on the channel. As Beatriz walks away, involved in her spiral of revenge, Ricardo feels increasingly powerless and lost. The image of Miguel, stretched lifeless in Beatriz's arms, haunts him, a constant reminder of his failure to protect them. Guilt eats away at him from within, questioning every decision he made, every step he took. He feels responsible for the tragedy, convinced that he could have done more, that he could have foreseen the servant's betrayal. Beatriz's advice to stay away further breaks her morale. Instead of giving in to despair, Ricardo decides to channel his pain into action. He needs to understand what happened. He needs to find a way to prevent history from repeating itself. He dives headlong into research, revisiting the archives of Miguel's family, seeking answers in the dusty books of the library, interviewing former employees of the mansion. The investigation leads him to uncover dark secrets, horrors that have been carefully hidden for generations. He discovers that Miguel's family curse is not only a matter of black magic and evil entities, but also of exploitation, oppression, and violence. The family built its fortune and power on the suffering of its servants, enslaving them, torturing them, and using them as sacrifices to feed the entity. The servant, whose name was Elijah, was not an isolated case. He was just another victim of a cruel and inhumane system. Richard learns that many other servants suffered at the hands of Michael's family, being killed, tortured, and stripped of their lives. Their families were torn apart, their lands stolen, their histories erased. Ricardo feels a wave of anger and indignation. He realizes that the entity feeds not only on black magic, but also on the pain and suffering that has been inflicted on the servants. The curse is a vicious cycle of violence and injustice which has been perpetuated for centuries. The investigation leads him to find descendants of the former servants, people who still carry the mark of oppression in their lives. Some of them live in misery, marginalized and forgotten by society. Others, however, harbor a deep hatred for Miguel's family, seeking revenge for the crimes of their ancestors. Ricardo is faced with a moral dilemma. He can ignore the past and focus only on destroying the entity, or he can try to bring justice to the servants and break the cycle of violence that plagues Miguel's family. He knows that revenge won't bring Miguel back, but he also feels he can't just let history repeat itself. As he struggles with this dilemma, Ricardo begins to have flashbacks of his wife's death. He remembers the terror in her eyes, his helplessness to protect her. He realizes that the fight against the entity is not only about saving the world from evil, but also about atoning for the guilt for not being able to save his wife. He is attracted to the descendants of the servants who seek revenge, understanding their pain and anger. He begins to get involved in their plans, helping them to organize themselves and plan their retribution. However, the more he gets involved, the more he feels uncomfortable. He begins to wonder if he's doing the right thing, if he's just feeding the cycle of violence, or if he's really helping to break the curse. He meets with an ancient healer, a descendant of one of the most mistreated servant families by Miguel's family. She tells him terrible stories of torture and slavery, of broken families and shattered dreams. She shows him the scars his family has carried for generations, the marks of oppression that have been passed down from father to son. The healer offers Ricardo a different view of the situation. She tells him that revenge is not the answer, that the only way to break the curse is to forgive and move on. It shows him that hatred only feeds the entity, giving it more power and strength. Ricardo feels confused and lost. He no longer knows who to believe nor which path to follow. He finds himself in a dead end, caught between the past and the future, between revenge and forgiveness. The mansion, sensing Ricardo's confusion, begins to manifest itself more intensely. Ghosts from the past haunt him, whispering secrets and revealing horrors. He feels surrounded by vengeful spirits, crying out for justice and blood. In a moment of desperation, Ricardo finds himself in the old family cemetery, in front of his wife's grave. He kneels down and begins to cry, begging for an answer. Suddenly, he has a vision. He sees his wife smiling at him, radiating peace and love. She tells him that he needs to forgive himself, that he needs to put the past behind him and move on with his life. It shows him that revenge will not bring peace, only more pain and suffering. Richard wakes up, feeling renewed and strengthened. He realizes that the healer and his wife were right. Revenge is not the answer. He needs to break the cycle of violence. He needs to find a way to forgive and move on. He decides to distance himself from the descendants of the servants who seek revenge and focus on finding a way to destroy the entity. He knows he can't do it alone, that he needs Beatriz's help. He returns to the mansion, determined to reconcile with Beatriz and convince her to abandon revenge. But he knows that the task will not be easy. The pain and hatred consumed her completely, transforming her into a different person. Upon entering the mansion, Ricardo is confronted by a ghost from the past, the spirit of a former servant, tortured and killed by Miguel's family. The spirit tries to attack him, crying out for revenge. Ricardo defends himself, but doesn't want to hurt his spirit. He tries to talk to him, explain that he is not responsible for the crimes of his ancestors. The spirit is irreducible, consumed by hatred and the desire for revenge. He attacks Ricardo with even more fury, trying to kill him. In a moment of desperation, Ricardo kneels before the spirit and begs for forgiveness. He offers to atone for the crimes of his ancestors, promising to dedicate his life to helping the descendants of the servants and breaking the cycle of violence. The spirit is surprised by Ricardo's attitude. He never expected to find compassion and humility in a member of Miguel's family. Gradually, the hatred of the spirit begins to dissipate, giving way to sadness and regret. He realizes that Ricardo is telling the truth, that he really wants to make a difference. The spirit forgives Ricardo and disappears, finally finding peace. Ricardo stands up, feeling relieved and strengthened. He knows that he is on the right path, that the only way to break the curse is to forgive and move on. He meets Beatriz at the training camp, training with even more intensity than before. He watches her for a moment, admiring her strength and determination. He approaches her and starts talking. He tells about his discoveries, about the dark past of Michael's family, about the suffering of the servants. Beatriz listens to him in silence, without expressing any emotion. Ricardo feels that he is talking to a wall, that it has completely closed on him. He ends his story by begging her to abandon revenge and join him in the search for a way to break the curse. Beatriz looks him in the eyes, and Ricardo sees a glimmer of hope in his eyes. She hesitates for a moment, and Ricardo feels that she is considering his words, but suddenly his gaze becomes cold and distant. She walks away from Ricardo, saying that he doesn't understand, that revenge is the only thing that keeps her alive. Ricardo feels defeated. He realizes that Beatriz is very far away, that pain and hatred have consumed her completely. He prepares to leave, giving up trying to convince her. But before he can do so, Beatriz calls him back. She turns to him, tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to do," she says, her voice breaking. "I'm lost. I need help." Ricardo smiles, feeling immense relief. He knows that Beatriz is still there, trapped in her grief but still alive. He knows he can help her break free from revenge and find peace. He approaches Beatriz and hugs her tightly. "I'm here," he whispers. "I'll help you get through this. Together, we will break the curse." They hug each other for a long time, sharing their pain and their hope. They know the battle will be uphill, but they are ready to face any obstacle as long as they are together. The fragile truce between Beatriz and Ricardo turns into a hesitant partnership, but with a common goal: to prevent the servant from freeing the entity. Michael's words, echoing in their memories, impel them to act, reminding them of the importance of striving for good, even when darkness seems inevitable. The starting point is the fragmented knowledge they have. The servant's memories, accessed briefly by Ricardo, indicate the location of the stolen ingredients. 3 artifacts imbued with power, hidden in places of dark significance to Miguel's family. Beatriz, with her calculating coldness, takes the lead. "We need these artifacts," she declares, her voice devoid of emotion. "Each of them is a key to the servant's ritual. Without them, he cannot free the entity." Ricardo, in turn, focuses on gathering information. He contacts his informants, descendants of the former servants, seeking clues about the artifacts and their possible guardians. With each new discovery, the web of secrets and betrayals becomes more complex, revealing that Miguel's family curse extends far beyond the walls of the mansion. The first clue leads them to an ancient cemetery, a place where Miguel's family buried their loved ones and where servants were thrown into mass graves, forgotten and despised. In the midst of the tombstones and tombs, they find a stone altar, desecrated with obscure symbols. Beatriz realizes that the altar is a portal to the world of spirits, a place where the entity feeds on the pain and suffering of the dead. She senses an evil presence approaching, testing her strength and her resolve. Suddenly, a group of shadowy figures emerges from the shadows. They are the guardians of the artifact, followers of the entity, willing to defend their master at any cost. A brutal battle ensues, with Beatriz and Ricardo fighting side by side against the Guardians. Beatriz moves with impressive agility, using her combat skills to take down her enemies. Ricardo, in turn, uses his intelligence and experience with the supernatural to disarm the Guardians and protect Beatriz. During the fight, Ricardo is attacked by one of the Guardians, who throws him against a tombstone. He hits his head hard and loses consciousness. Beatriz, seeing Ricardo fallen, feels a wave of anger consuming her. She turns to the Guardian and attacks him with fury, knocking him to the ground. She takes a wooden stake and drives it into the Guardian's heart, killing him instantly. The other Guardians, seeing their leader fall, flee in terror. Beatriz approaches Ricardo and helps him get up. She feels guilty for putting him in danger, but also grateful to have him by her side. They examine the altar and find the first artifact, a necklace of bones, which emanates a cold and oppressive energy. Beatriz takes the necklace and puts it in her pocket, feeling the power of the entity approaching. The second clue leads them to an old theater, a place where Michael's family had fun and where servants were forced to perform to entertain their masters. On the stage of the theater, they find a broken mirror reflecting distorted and frightening images. Ricardo explains that the mirror is a portal to the world of dreams, a place where the entity manipulates people's minds and drives them crazy. He warns Beatriz not to look directly into the mirror, as the entity may try to control her. As they examine the mirror, they hear a sound of footsteps approaching. They hide behind the curtains and peek to see who is coming. To their surprise, they see a group of street performers dressed in extravagant outfits and colorful makeup. The artists are dancing and singing, entertaining an audience of people. Beatriz and Ricardo realize that the artists are being controlled by the entity, which is using them to attract victims to the theater. They need to stop artists from continuing to perform, but they don't want to hurt the innocent people who are watching the show. They devise a plan to unmask the artists and free them from the entity's control. Beatriz disguises herself as a street artist and joins the group, while Ricardo infiltrates the audience. During the show, Beatriz reveals her true identity and exposes the entity's plans. The artists, freed from control, join Beatriz and Ricardo to fight against the entity's followers, who appear to protect the mirror. A new battle begins, with artists and spectators fighting side by side against the forces of evil. The scene is chaotic and surreal, with vibrant colors and deafening music contrasting with the violence and terror. In the end, Beatriz and Ricardo manage to defeat the entity's followers and destroy the mirror, freeing people from mind control. They take the second artifact, a porcelain mask, which radiates an aura of sadness and despair. The third and final clue leads them to an old asylum, a place where Miguel's family locked up their relatives considered insane, and where servants were tortured and subjected to cruel experiments. Upon entering the asylum, Beatriz and Ricardo are enveloped by an atmosphere of terror and despair. The corridors are dark and dirty, the cells are empty, and the walls are covered with scribbles and messages of madness. They hear whispers and screams echoing through the hallways, as if the ghosts of the former patients are still trapped there. Beatriz feels distraught and distressed, remembering her own traumas and her own fears. Suddenly, they are attacked by a group of patients from the asylum who have been transformed into monstrous creatures by the entity. The patients are strong and violent, and Beatriz and Ricardo must fight with all their strength to survive. During the fight, Beatriz is separated from Ricardo and gets lost in the labyrinths of the asylum. She finds herself alone, surrounded by madness and terror. She wanders the corridors, hearing whispers and seeing figures. She feels increasingly disturbed and confused, losing track of reality. Suddenly, she is faced with a locked cell. Inside the cell, she sees a woman sitting in a corner, rocking back and forth. Beatriz approaches the cell and tries to talk to the woman. The woman looks at Beatriz with a blank and lifeless stare. "They're coming," the woman whispers, her voice weak and hesitant. "They want to get me. They want to use me." Beatriz realizes that the woman is being controlled by the entity, which is using her to scare and disorient her. She tries to free the woman, but the cell is locked and she doesn't have the key. Suddenly, the cell door opens on its own. Beatriz hesitates for a moment, but decides to enter the cell. She approaches the woman and tries to comfort her. The woman grabs Beatriz's arm tightly and pulls her into the cell. Beatriz struggles, trying to free herself, but the woman is stronger than she imagined. The woman begins to whisper strange words in an unfamiliar language. Beatriz feels an evil energy invading her, trying to control her mind. She fights with all her might to resist the entity's influence, but it's getting harder and harder. She feels like she's losing control of her own body and mind. Suddenly, she hears Ricardo's voice calling her name. She focuses on Ricardo's voice, using it to stay connected to reality. Ricardo finds Beatriz in the cell and frees her from the influence of the entity. He picks up the woman and takes her out of the cell, leaving her in a safe place. Beatriz and Ricardo hug, relieved to be together again. They realize that the entity is trying to tear them apart and that they need to stay together to survive. They continue to explore the asylum, encountering horrors and challenges at every turn. They face monstrous patients, vengeful ghosts, and deadly traps. In the end, they find the last artifact, a leather book which emanates an aura of madness and despair. Beatriz takes the book and puts it in her purse, feeling the power of the entity intensifying. With the three artifacts in their possession, Beatriz and Ricardo prepare to confront the servant and prevent him from freeing the entity from its prison. They know the battle will be the hardest of their lives, but they are determined to fight to the end, to protect the world from evil. See if you are already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Leave your like so we know that you are enjoying the content, and leave your opinion below in the comments of what content or story you would like to appear here on the channel. The cold air cuts like a razor, carrying with it the foul odor of sulfur and decaying flesh. Beatriz and Ricardo, each carrying the weight of their own traumas and responsibility for the fate of the world, finally locate the servant. He finds himself in an ancient Indian cemetery, a place of ancient power corrupted by darkness. The scene that unfolds is horrifying. The servant, wrapped in filthy rags and adorned with blasphemous symbols, presides over a blood-stained stone altar. Around him, a circle of hooded figures chant in a dead language, fueling the profane energy emanating from the place. Mutilated bodies of animals and black candles scattered on the ground complete the macabre scenario. In the center of the altar, under the fixed and insane gaze of the servant, lies a young woman, gagged and bound, about to be sacrificed. The terror in their eyes mirrors the despair that Beatriz and Ricardo feel in their hearts. "You arrived too late," the servant scoffs, his hoarse, guttural voice echoing through the cemetery. "The ritual is about to begin. Soon the entity will be liberated, and the world will know the true meaning of terror." Without hesitation, Beatriz and Ricardo advance towards the servant, determined to interrupt the ritual. But the followers of the entity, protecting their master, pounce on them, starting a brutal and bloody battle. Ricardo, with his experience in combat and knowledge of the supernatural, faces his followers with courage and determination. He uses amulets and protection rituals to defend himself from magical attacks, while his fists and intelligence disarm and incapacitate his opponents. Beatriz, in turn, turns into a revenge machine. The fury over Miguel's death drives her to fight with relentless ferocity, her movements precise and lethal. She uses the skills she has honed in her training, delivering well-aimed blows that take down her enemies with ease. Despite their bravery, Beatriz and Ricardo are outnumbered. The entity's followers are many, and their fanatical devotion makes them ruthless. With each passing moment, the energy of the ritual intensifies, making the environment even more dangerous. Ricardo, realizing that the situation is becoming untenable, decides to sacrifice himself to give Beatriz the chance to reach the servant. "Go, Beatriz!" he shouts, as he pounces on a group of followers, trapping them in a circle of fire. "And I'll buy time for you. Destroy the servant and put an end to it once and for all." Beatriz hesitates for a moment, torn between the desire to help Ricardo and the need to prevent the ritual. But she knows that Ricardo is right. She needs to seize the opportunity and end the threat of the entity. With a heavy heart, Beatriz abandons Ricardo to his fate and runs towards the altar, facing the last followers who prevent her from reaching the servant. The servant, seeing Beatriz approaching, smiles with satisfaction. "You're foolish to think you can stop me," he says in a confident tone. "The power of the entity is immeasurable. You don't stand a chance." Beatriz ignores the servant's words and keeps moving forward, her determination unwavering. She dodges followers' attacks, disarming and incapacitating them with quick and accurate blows. Finally, she arrives at the altar, face to face with the servant. He raises a ceremonial dagger, ready to sacrifice the young woman. "This is the end," says the servant with an insane look. "Soon, the entity will be freed and you will be the first to feel its wrath." Beatriz prepares to attack, but hesitates. She notices that the servant is using the young woman as bait, trapping her near the altar to prevent her from approaching. If she attacks the servant, she may end up hurting the young woman. But if she does nothing, the servant will sacrifice her and free the entity. Beatriz is faced with an impossible dilemma. She needs to find a way to save the young woman and stop the ritual, without putting herself in danger. The wind howls like an ancient lament, blowing away the acrid smell of blood and terror emanating from the cemetery. Beatriz, paralyzed in the face of the dilemma, feels the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every second that passes increases the risk that the ritual will be completed, that the entity will be freed, and countless lives will be taken. The image of the bound young woman, her eyes wide with dread, is fixed in his mind. She finds herself in the girl's place, powerless and at the mercy of a cruel fate. The memory of Miguel, killed by an act of pure evil, invades her with renewed force. She cannot allow anyone else to suffer the same fate. The servant, noticing Beatriz's hesitation, smiles with derision. "Your weakness is your ruin," he hisses, raising the ceremonial dagger over the helpless young woman. "Get ready to witness the rise of true power." However, instead of giving in to fear, Beatriz finds unexpected strength. She remembers Miguel's words, echoing in her mind like a mantra. Fight for what's right, even if it means sacrificing everything. With surprising clarity, Beatriz makes her decision. She can't save everyone, but she can do whatever she can to stop the entity. She will not allow the girl to become another victim of the curse. She closes her eyes, taking a deep breath to control the trembling that overwhelms her. It focuses on Miguel, on his love, on his strength. Let pain turn into determination. Let fear turn into courage. Then, with a guttural scream, Beatriz launches herself forward, not towards the servant, but towards the bound young woman. With a quick and precise movement, she cuts the girl's bonds, freeing her from the altar. The servant, surprised by Beatrice's attitude, hesitates for a moment. The young woman, seizing the opportunity, throws herself out of reach of the altar, running towards the darkness of the forest. "You fool!" shouts the servant, enraged. "You ruined everything! Now I have no choice but to use you as a sacrifice." He turns to Beatrice, his ceremonial dagger raised. She prepares for the coup, resigned to her fate. She knows she's about to die, but she feels at peace, knowing she did what was right. However, instead of delivering the blow, the servant hesitates. He looks at Beatriz with a strange look, as if he is seeing something she cannot see. "You," he whispers, his voice trembling, "you are the chosen one." Beatrice feels confused. What does the servant mean by this? Why is he hesitating to kill her? Suddenly, the servant throws the dagger on the ground and kneels before Beatrice. "Please forgive me," he begs, tears in his eyes. "I was deceived. I didn't know what I was doing." Beatrice feels even more confused. What's happening? Why is the servant suddenly repenting? The servant explains that he has always believed that the entity was a force for good, capable of bringing justice and prosperity to the world. He was deceived by false promises and manipulated by dark forces. He reveals that the sacrificial ritual was not to free the entity, but rather to seal it in a human vessel. He believed that the sacrificed person would become a kind of deity, capable of controlling the power of the entity. However, he now realizes that the entity is evil and that the ritual will only bring destruction and suffering to the world. He regrets his actions and begs for Beatrice's forgiveness. Beatrice is hesitant to believe the servant. She was betrayed so many times that it became difficult to trust anyone. However, she sees sincerity in his eyes, a genuine regret for his mistakes. She realizes that the servant is just another victim of the entity, another piece in her evil plan. Beatrice decides to give the servant a chance. She helps him up and questions him about how to destroy the entity. The servant explains that the only way to destroy the entity is to perform a purification ritual capable of purging evil from the world. However, the ritual is complex and dangerous, requiring the sacrifice of a pure soul. Beatrice realizes that the sacrifice required by the purification ritual is not death, but the total and unrestricted surrender of herself to the cause of good. She must renounce revenge, hatred, pain, and become a beacon of hope in a world plunged into darkness. She looks up at the sky, feeling Miguel's presence comforting and guiding her. She knows what she needs to do. "I accept," says Beatrice, in a firm and decisive voice. "I offer to perform the purification ritual. I will sacrifice myself to protect the world from evil." The servant is surprised by Beatrice's decision. He hoped that she would seek revenge, that she would punish him for his crimes, but she's willing to forgive him and sacrifice herself to save the world. Together, Beatriz and the servant begin to prepare the purification ritual. They collect the necessary ingredients, recite the sacred words, and prepare for the final moment. As they prepare for the ritual, Beatriz feels an inner peace she has never felt before. She freed herself from pain and hatred, finding a greater purpose in her life. She looks at the servant with gratitude and compassion. She forgave him for his mistakes and helped him find redemption. The moment of the ritual arrives. Beatrice positions herself in the center of the circle, surrounded by the sacred symbols. She closes her eyes and begins to recite the words of purification, surrendering her soul to the power of good. An intense light envelops her, driving out the darkness and filling the world with hope and love. At the apex of the ritual, a wave of pure energy emanates from Beatrice, sweeping through the cemetery and dissolving the darkness that haunted it. The mutilated bodies crumble into dust, the profane songs fall silent, and the earth itself seems to breathe a sigh of relief. The servant, bathed in light, falls to his knees, tears washing guilt from his face. But the entity does not surrender easily. Trapped inside Beatriz, she fights with fury, trying to corrupt the purity of the ritual, to bend the heroine's will. Beatriz's mind becomes a battlefield, where memories of Miguel clash with whispers of hatred and promises of power. She sees herself standing in front of a mirror, her reflected image distorted and monstrous, sharp claws replacing her fingers, red eyes glowing with lust. The entity tempts her, offering the chance to bring Miguel back, to rule the world, to take revenge on everyone who made her suffer. "You can have everything you've ever wanted," the entity whispers in Miguel's voice, a cruel trick that almost makes her falter. "Just surrender to me. Together, we will be invincible." Beatriz closes her eyes, focusing on the love she feels for Miguel, on the memories of the happy moments they shared. She refuses to give in to temptation, to become the monster that the entity wants her to be. With a scream of fury, she destroys the mirror, breaking the last link that linked her to the entity. She frees herself from the evil influence, reaffirming her commitment to good. In the outside world, Beatriz's body begins to glow brightly, radiating a light so strong that it blinds the servant. He covers himself with his hands, fearing that he will be consumed by the heroine's power. Suddenly, the light goes out. Silence returns to the graveyard, deeper and more oppressive than ever. The servant opens his eyes slowly, trembling with fear. He looks at the center of the circle, expecting to find Beatriz's body, but what he sees paralyzes him with terror. Beatriz is no longer there. In its place, there is only a circle of ashes, the only trace of its existence. The servant falls to the ground, weeping in sorrow and despair. He believed that Beatriz was the key to the salvation of the world, but now she is gone, sacrificed forever. Or is it? In the midst of the ashes, something shines. A small flower, with delicate white petals, blooms where before there was only darkness and death. The flower exudes a soft and comforting scent, filling the cemetery with hope. The servant approaches the flower, his heart full of doubts. He touches her petals carefully, feeling a strange energy run through his body. Suddenly, he has a vision. He sees Beatriz smiling at him, radiating peace and love. She tells him that he needs to keep fighting, that the battle against evil is not over yet. "I will always be with you," whispers Beatriz, in a soft and serene voice. "Remember my strength, my courage, my love, and never give up." The vision disappears, leaving the servant alone in the graveyard. He looks at the flower, feeling a new determination invade him. He knows that Beatriz is not gone forever, that her spirit lives in his heart, guiding him on his journey. He knows that he needs to honor his sacrifice, fighting to build a better world, a world free of evil. However, as the servant prepares to leave the graveyard, something strange happens. The flower begins to wither, its petals becoming dark and withered. The air is charged with a sinister energy, and the servant feels an evil presence approaching. He turns around and sees a shadowy figure emerging from the shadows. The figure slowly approaches, revealing a familiar face. Miguel's face, but Miguel's eyes are red and bright. His mouth contorts into a cruel smile. "Did you miss me?" asks Miguel, in a voice that is not his own. Beatriz may have won the battle, but the war is just beginning. How did Michael come back from the dead? Is he really Miguel, or has the entity found a new and even more dangerous way to manifest itself? What does the entity plan to do with Miguel's body? And how can the servant, alone and desolate, face this new threat without the help of Beatriz? The fight for the fate of the world is far from over, and darkness looms, stronger and more relentless than ever. Beatriz's inheritance, after all, has just begun, and the trials to come will test the limits of courage and faith.